I never thought a 20-second clip would be enough to rewrite the last 5 years of my life. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on the living room couch, nursing a half-finished cup of tea when my phone buzzed. My daughter-in-law Chloe had posted a new story on her social media. Usually she just posted aesthetic shots of her clothing boutique or the overpriced restaurants she frequented with my son Trevor. But this video was different. It looked like she had accidentally hit record while chatting with a friend at a coffee shop. The camera was pointed at the ceiling, but the audio was crystal clear. I heard her friend asking how they managed to maintain such a lavish lifestyle when her boutique was barely getting off the ground. Chloe's laugh echoed through the speaker. "Oh, please. Diane pays for everything." She scoffed, talking about me. She's a pathetic failure, honestly. Since she became a widow, she really has no life of her own. She should be grateful we let her feel useful by paying my bills. At least it makes her feel like she actually has a family. I didn't get a lump in my throat. I didn't feel the sudden urge to cry. For 5 years, ever since my husband passed away, I had quietly covered the $3,500 monthly commercial lease for Chloe's storefront and the $800 payment for Trevor's brand new truck. I did it because I genuinely believed that's what families do. They hold each other up when things are getting started. I assumed the respect was mutual, even if it was unspoken. I put the video on loop. I listened to her mockery so casual and unbothered. I screen recorded the clip and saved it to my phone before she could realize her mistake and delete it. Then I stood up, carried my mug to the kitchen, and washed it with absolute calm. Chloe thought my generosity was a chronic weakness. She had no idea that my patience had an expiration date. That very same night, I booted up my laptop. I've always been a creature of habit, someone who prefers hard data over emotional drama. I didn't fire off angry text messages to my son. I didn't call my daughter-in-law demanding an apology. Forced apologies are about as empty as a cheap promise. Instead, I opened a blank spreadsheet. I went through my bank statements for the last 5 years, row by row, month by month. Chloe's commercial rent, Trevor's truck payments and insurance premiums. The credit card balances I cleared just this once, when they wanted to go to the Bahamas. Staring at the grand total at the bottom of the screen didn't make me furious. It gave me an icy clarity. I had bankrolled an absolute circus, and I was the main punchline. With a few clicks, I logged into my online banking portal. I navigated to my scheduled automatic transfers. There were 2 set for the first of every month, one to the commercial property management company, and the other to the auto financier. I selected both and hit cancel. The system asked me if I was sure. I didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. Afterward, I printed the spreadsheet. 3 full pages of exact figures, no exaggerations, no emotions. I folded them neatly, slid them into a manila envelope, and tucked it into my desk drawer. The peace I felt when I shut down the computer was something I hadn't experienced in years. I went to bed with a clean conscience and the steering wheel of my life firmly back in my own hands. It was only 4 days until the first of the month, and I was ready to sit back and watch. Sunday rolled around, and right on schedule, Trevor and Chloe came over for lunch. Chloe waltzed in with her usual air of superiority, dropping her designer handbag on the entryway chair. She was wearing a brand new pair of heels that, ironically, my latest wire transfer had basically subsidized. "Smells delicious, Diane." Chloe chimed, taking her seat at the dining table while I finished setting out the roast. Her tone was sweet, almost sickeningly sugary. It was the exact same voice she had used in the video right before calling me a pathetic failure. Trevor sat down next to her, mindlessly scrolling through his phone. I watched them both from the head of the table. In the past, I would have been hovering, making sure their plates were perfect, practically begging them to take home leftovers in clean Tupperware. This time, I just ate in silence, actually tasting my own food for once. Everything okay, Mom? You're awfully quiet today, Trevor asked, finally noticing that I wasn't rushing to cater to them. Everything is exactly as it should be, I replied, taking a slow sip of my ice water. Chloe started rambling about her plans to remodel the display window at her boutique next month, casually dropping hints about how insanely expensive the materials were. Usually, I'd take the bait and offer to help. This time, I let her words fall completely flat. I didn't offer a dime. I didn't pull out my checkbook. I just offered a vague nod. The energy in the room shifted, growing tense, though neither of them could quite put their finger on why. They made their excuses and left early. As I watched Trevor's truck pull out of the driveway, a faint smile crossed my face. Tomorrow was the first of the month. It was 10 a.m. on Tuesday when my cell phone started ringing. Chloe's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring until it dumped to voicemail. I knew exactly what it was about. Her commercial landlord was notoriously ruthless. If the rent wasn't in his account by 9 a.m. sharp on the 1st, he was on the phone threatening eviction. 5 minutes later, a text popped up from my son. Mom, I think the bank messed up. Chloe says her rent payment bounced. Can you check your account? My auto loan company just texted me a late alert too. I poured myself a fresh cup of black coffee, picked up my phone, and typed out a simple, airtight response. There's no mistake at the bank, Trevor. The automatic transfers have been permanently canceled. From today forward, your expenses are your own responsibility. I hit send and immediately flipped my phone into airplane mode. I had zero desire to deal with their immediate frantic panic. I wanted them to sit in the raw reality of the situation. For years, my bank account had been the cushion that softened their arrogance. Now, they were in a free fall toward the pavement of the real world. I went out back and spent the morning tending to my garden. The sun was shining, the weather was perfect. For the first time in forever, my brain wasn't doing mental gymnastics, trying to figure out how to stretch my retirement to fund someone else's vanity. I knew a storm was headed for my front door, but my house was built of solid brick. That afternoon, the peace of my home was shattered. The doorbell didn't ring with its usual polite chime. It was a long, frantic, aggressive buzz. I knew exactly who was on the porch. When I opened the door, I was met with the very picture of panic dressed in designer labels. Chloe's face was flush red, her chest heaving, clutching her purse like it was a shield. Trevor stood half a step behind her, his shoulders slumped in a mix of confusion and deep embarrassment. "What is the meaning of this, Diane?" Chloe demanded, before I could even say hello. She crossed her arms, completely abandoning the sickly sweet tone she had used in my dining room just days prior. "The landlord is threatening me with insane late fees. You can't just cut us off without warning. You're going to ruin us." "Mom, please explain what's going on. It has to be a mix-up with the bank," Trevor pleaded, trying to run interference for his wife's hostility. I stepped aside and let them into the foyer. I didn't invite them to sit, and I certainly didn't offer them a drink. I walked calmly over to my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the manila envelope I had prepped. I walked back and handed it directly to my son. "There's no mix-up, Trevor," I said, my voice as flat, and even as if I were reading the weather forecast. "Open it." Trevor pulled out the printed sheets. 3 pages of numbers, dates, and wire transfer confirmations. Everything I had covered for them over 60 months. But the real kicker was on the very last page. Right below the grand total of $285,400. I had printed a screenshot of Chloe's coffee shop video along with the exact transcript of her words. "She's a pathetic failure. She should be grateful we let her feel useful by paying my bills." Trevor read the text and froze. His eyes darted from the paper to his wife's face. Chloe, growing impatient, snatched the papers out of his hands. I watched the color drain from her face in real time. Her lips trembled as her brain scrambled for an excuse to justify the unjustifiable. This was totally taken out of context, Diane. It was just a stupid joke with a girlfriend. She stammered, her combative posture crumbling into dust. I'm not angry, Chloe, I replied, holding her evasive gaze without blinking. On the contrary, you made me realize I've been entirely too useful to this family. It's time for you two to show off all that success you brag about. Your finances are yours now. Trevor took a step toward me, maybe to apologize. I don't know. But I beat him to it. I stepped over to the entryway console where he had just tossed his car keys. I picked up his keychain, and with a practiced flick of my thumb, I slid my spare house key off the ring. I dropped it into my cardigan pocket right in front of him. This is my home, not an extension of your budget, and not a place you can just walk into whenever it's convenient, I said, placing his lighter keychain back on the table. You know the way out. Neither of them had the nerve to utter another syllable. They turned around and walked out the door in the heaviest silence I have ever witnessed. My heart rate hadn't even spiked. I woke up the next morning with a surge of energy. Taking back control of my money was the first logical step, but my house was still physically cluttered with their arrogance. For years, Chloe and Trevor had treated my spacious two-car garage like their personal rent-free storage unit. There were towers of unsold inventory, from the boutique, a ridiculously expensive treadmill, collecting dust and oversized furniture they were too lazy to fit into their modern downtown apartment. It was a physical manifestation of how they had invaded my life, taking up my space without paying, without asking, and without a shred of gratitude. At 8 a.m., a local moving company pulled into my driveway. I had hired 3 young, efficient guys with a box truck. Everything on the right side goes, I instructed, pointing to the mountain of boxes and furniture. Be careful with it, but take absolutely all of it. I paid them up front in cash and handed them a slip of paper with Trevor's apartment building address. While the crew loaded up the truck, I made a fresh cup of coffee and sat on my back porch. No rush, no stress. For the first time in half a decade, I was daydreaming about how I'd actually use my own garage. Maybe I'd set up a potting station for my plants or a quiet reading nook. Right around noon, my phone buzzed on the patio table. The moving foreman texted me a photo. They had neatly stacked every single box, the heavy treadmill, and all the furniture directly in the hallway, completely barricading Trevor's front door. Job done. 5 minutes later, my phone lit up with a call from Trevor. I answered on the 3rd ring. Mom, oh my God, what is all this? His voice was high-pitched, practically hyperventilating. I came home for lunch and I literally can't get to my front door. The building manager is writing me a massive fine for blocking a fire exit. We don't have the square footage for any of this. I took a slow sip of my coffee before replying. That sounds like a logistical issue for you to figure out, Trevor, I said, calmly walking out to admire my newly emptied sunlit garage. My house isn't a free dumping ground for things you don't care about, just like my bank account isn't an emergency fund for a lifestyle you can't sustain. But Mom, what am I supposed to do with all these boxes? Chloe is going to lose her mind when she sees this. You can sell them, donate them, or go rent a commercial storage unit. The options are entirely yours, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. I suggest you figure it out fast before your HOA fines get any higher. Have a good afternoon. I hung up and set the phone down. Setting real ironclad boundaries didn't require screaming, insulting, or engaging in a drawn-out screaming match. It just required precise actions that handed people's problems right back to them. That afternoon, I grabbed a broom and swept out my garage floor, feeling lighter than I had in years. Friday afternoon, Trevor showed up at my house again. This time, he was alone. He rang the doorbell and waited. I opened the door, but I didn't invite him past the threshold. He looked exhausted, stripped of the arrogant armor Chloe usually provided him. "Mom, we really need to talk." He started running a hand through his hair. Chloe is hysterical. She had to take out a sketchy payday loan to cover the rent, and the interest rate is insane. I'm literally weeks away from having my truck repossessed. I looked at him, my expression unchanging. "She didn't mean those things in the video, Mom. She's been under so much pressure with the store, you know how it is. She was just venting. You can't just destroy us financially over one stupid comment." "I am not destroying you financially, Trevor," I replied, keeping my voice low and firm. "You two built a life entirely funded by money that wasn't yours. I simply removed the foundation. If the whole house collapses, it's because it was never solid to begin." "You're my mother," he pleaded, reaching for the oldest weapon in the book, guilt. "You're supposed to help us." "Helping is supporting someone who is actively walking. It's not carrying someone who is stepping on your neck while you do it," I said. I pulled the front door toward me, signaling the conversation was over. "You are a grown man. It's time you step up and learn how to balance your own checkbook. Goodbye, Trevor." I shut the door and turned the deadbolt. His excuses bounced right off the solid wood, completely unable to reach me. 2 weeks later, my niece Megan hosted a dinner party for her wedding anniversary. I knew Trevor and Chloe would be there. I showed up wearing a beautiful, elegant dress I had bought with the money I was no longer bleeding into their accounts. The moment I walked in, I noticed the whispers. Chloe had clearly been doing damage control, spinning her own victim narrative to anyone who would listen. According to her, I had suffered some sort of mental break and abandoned them out of pure spite, pushing them to the brink of bankruptcy. I took my seat in the dining room, greeting my siblings and nieces with my usual warmth. Halfway through the main course, my notoriously gossipy sister-in-law couldn't hold it in any longer. Diane Chloe was telling us that you cut off all their support overnight. "Don't you think you're being a little harsh on the kids?" Chloe looked at me from across the table, slipping effortlessly into her victim persona. The entire room went dead silent. Everyone expected me to either erupt in a defensive shouting match or shrink away in shame. Instead, I calmly laid my silverware across my plate. I cut off the financial support because I realized my help was turning them into entitled, disrespectful people. I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. I bankrolled their luxuries for 5 years. When they decided my only purpose in this family was to be an open ATM and a pathetic failure, I decided my ATM was permanently out of order. There is no more to the story than that. I picked up my wine glass and took a sip. Chloe turned, beet red, dropped her gaze to her plate, and didn't utter a single word for the rest of the night. The truth, delivered without an ounce of anger, is absolutely bulletproof. By the following month, the fallout of my financial withdrawal was undeniable. I was driving through downtown and saw a "For Lease" sign plastered across the big bay window of Chloe's boutique. She couldn't keep the lights on without my money. Shortly after, Megan mentioned in passing that Trevor had voluntarily surrendered his truck to the bank because the payments were drowning him and he was now taking the bus to work. The bubble they had been living in had completely burst. One afternoon, I found a handwritten letter in my mailbox. It was from Trevor. There were no demands in it. He simply admitted that they had messed up, that their pride had blinded them, and that they were finally learning what it meant to live within their actual means. He apologized for allowing me to be treated like a human checkbook and asked if somewhere down the line we could just grab a cup of coffee. Just mother and son. No mention of money, no plea for a bailout. I sat on my patio reading the letter in the late afternoon sun. I didn't feel the urge to call him right away. The wound needed more time to heal, and they needed more time to prove they could stand on their own 2 feet. I folded the paper and put it away. The harsh reality of the world had taught them more in a few weeks than my lectures could have taught them in a lifetime. Sometimes a mother's greatest act of love is stepping back and letting her kids sit in the extreme discomfort of their own bad choices. It's been 6 months since the day those rent payments bounced. My life has changed entirely, and for the better. I used the thousands of dollars I saved to finally remodel my kitchen, a project I had been putting off since my husband passed. I even bought plane tickets for a beach vacation with my niece Megan, a little luxury I now enjoy without a drop of guilt. My home is blissfully quiet. There are no more frantic last-minute demands, no covert requests for cash, and no more family dinners where I feel like a second-class citizen funding the party. Yesterday, I finally texted Trevor to see if he wanted to get that cup of coffee next week. Just him. We're meeting on neutral ground, and for the first time in his adult life, he's buying. It's a very small step, but it's built on boundaries made of steel. I don't see myself as a hero nor a villain. I'm just a woman who remembered her own worth before it was entirely stripped away. I learned that generosity is a beautiful trait, but without mutual respect, it quickly devolves into servitude. The day I stopped paying the admission fee for my family's love, I realized exactly what my peace of mind was worth. And that, without a doubt, is an account that will forever remain settled. Over the years, I made the fatal mistake of confusing love with utility. I convinced myself that caring for my family meant silently fixing their lives, constantly patting the ground, so they'd never feel the impact of a fall. But life has a funny way of showing you that limitless generosity doesn't always breed gratitude. More often than not, it just breeds entitlement. And once entitlement sets in, respect walks right out the door. The biggest takeaway from all of this has nothing to do with dollars and cents. It's about self-worth. I learned that I don't need to scream demand apologies or play the martyr to shift the dynamic of my life. You don't have to raise your voice to make a deafening point. Sometimes the most devastating response to disrespect is absolute silence backed by an unbreakable boundary. Closing the Bank of Mom wasn't an act of petty revenge. It was an act of emotional survival. Drawing a line in the sand didn't mean I stopped loving my son. It meant that after a very long time, I finally remembered how to love myself. And that is a kind of peace no amount of money could ever buy.